Good morning, and welcome to Changing the World with God and with Good, where for about 5 or 10 minutes I get to share God with you, sharing with you universal kingdom characteristics of good, without religious bias, ethnic bias, national bias, political bias, or gender bias, but just sharing with you universal truths that were meant for all of us to apply to our daily lives. And for just a moment, I want to talk from the subject wasted time and energy. Wasted time and energy. And I want to talk from this particular subject. And I think today will probably be more of maybe a teaching from a teaching perspective, because I notice, and I guess I won't use the word fed up, but I'm troubled by the regularity at which good finds itself fighting good. I mean, we spend a lot of time and energy fighting one another, not realizing that fighting one another isn't the will of God. Fighting evil is the will of God. And this happens because, we've allowed religion to become more important, or I guess that's the word, more important than the characteristics and the principles, or for that matter, God himself. And we find ourselves fighting over the name of God. We fight over whether Jehovah is the name of God, whether Yahweh is the name of God, whether Allah is the name of God. And in all this fighting, what it does is keeps us preoccupied or occupied fighting one another instead of fighting the enemy of God, which is evil. I mean, you have to realize that God was God long before we began fighting and debating over his particular name, before he, for that matter, even before the Bible writers during the creation story began to refer to him as the God of the Hebrew God, the God of the Jews, the Christian God, the God of Islam, all the God names that we've associated with him throughout time. You must remember that in the beginning, even according to the Bible, God is referred to in the singular as the God of creation, the God of heaven and earth, the God that created heaven and earth. Yet we find ourselves locked in a perpetual war, fighting over the name of God, and not realizing that God was God before we ever began associating him with religion, before any of the Bible writers ever began associating him with ethnicities or with specific nations. God was God. And until we can get to the point where we realize that he was God, irrespective of the names, irrespective of nations, irrespective of ethnicities, irrespective of religion, then we will continually find ourselves fighting the wrong fight, not realizing that even according to the Bible, and again, you must understand that God was God long before any of the books were written, because God was God even before humans were created and sent into the earth, which means that the writing strip didn't come into effect, I think, at the earliest, maybe 2500 BC, maybe a little bit earlier. But you must understand that humans had been in the earth well over 100,000 years before they ever developed a writing form of communication. And even before they were in the earth, God was still God. And even according to the Bible, the only thing in the beginning, and again, you must understand that first things establishes a foundation for the things that follow. And the creation story being the first thing that we read about in the Bible, the foundation then is represented in the first verse. And the first verse says that in the beginning God created the heaven and the earth. Singularity, singular. God created the heaven and the earth. And this is important because as opposed to defining and thinking of God as a name, if we look to the Bible, then we can recognize in the story of creation that more so than being associated with a name, God was associated with good. So as it was in the beginning, so as it is in the end, irrespective of all the things that we've attached to God, or, irrespective of associating him with religion, irrespective of associating him with various ethnicities or nationalities or gender or any of those things. God in the beginning was associated with good. In the beginning, the enemy of God was Satan. In the beginning, the adversary of good was evil. So as it is in the beginning, so as it is in the end. And what happens is, while we're fighting one another over the name of God, evil is busy murdering our children, killing the innocent, robbing the vulnerable, taking advantage of the elderly. Yet we're locked in a perpetual war with one another, good, fighting good, not realizing that while we're engaged in this battle of, I guess it's intellectual supremacy, and we tie it to religious supremacy. Evil is just running rampant in the earth, and we're forgetting that the real enemy of God is Satan. The real enemy and adversary of good is evil. Yet we war over the name of God. We war over things that are really irrelevant as it relates to changing the world, changing the earth. But we're letting evil dictate and change the world because we are fighting one another. We fight over whether Jesus of Nazareth was God in the flesh. And we do this, because many have looked to the Bible writer during the creation story, indication that God said, "Let us make man in our own image," as he was fashioning humanity. And many of you think that that represented him talking to Jesus of Nazareth, not realizing that if you really rightly divide the word in the Bible, according to the creation story, you will find that God spoke to two entities as he was creating. And he spoke only to those two entities. And he, out of those two entities, with himself, he created everything and every life form that was mentioned to have been created during the creation story. He spoke to the ground and he told it to bring forth things. It brought forth the grass, the herb, the tree yielding fruits after itself. It brought forth the animals. And then not only did he speak to the ground, but he spoke to water. And he told water to bring forth life. And then after using those things to bring forth life, God said, "Let us." And he spoke to the ground again, and he spoke to the water. And with himself, they created humanity. Well, this is why every human being that has ever lived in the earth is part God. We're spirit people, all of us. We're part flesh. We're of the ground because God spoke to the ground. This is why our body, when we die out of this earth, will decay and go back to the ground. And we're mostly water. Yet we get wrapped up into not really rightly dividing the word of God. And we engage in these perpetual wars about whether Jesus of Nazareth was God in the flesh. And then many look to the opinion of John the Revelator in his record or his opinion that in the beginning was the Word was God, the Word was with God, and the Word became flesh in the form of Jesus of Nazareth. We engage in these wars, fighting over religious doctrines and religious theologies, not realizing that before any of the religions, not realizing that before God sent Jesus of Nazareth into the earth, humans had lived in the earth some 200,000 years. And God was still just God before he sent Jesus into the earth. He was still God. The enemy of God was still Satan. The adversary of good was still evil. Yet we war. We war with one another, fighting over religious doctrines and religious theologies. Not realizing that, again, before any of the books was written, God was still God. Yet we look to the books and we allow the books to keep us from thinking as rational beings as it relates to God. Because we allow ourselves to believe. Now we're thinking about the God that created all of humanity, the God that in the beginning created the heaven and the earth, the God that had created millions and millions and millions of humans, the God that had been sustaining humans, the God that had been forgiving humans, the God that had been saving humans. Yet we allow ourselves to believe that God would need to become human just to understand and save that which he had been creating since the beginning. Understanding humans, the same humans that he had created some 200,000 years before sending Jesus into the earth. We allow ourselves to believe this because it's written in the book. It's written in the book. But God was God and humans were humans before the books were ever written. Good was good before the books were ever written. And to think that God would, first of all, to think that God could be killed by the humans that he had created seems sacrilege. It seems to diminish and to devalue God. How can God, the creator of all things, of all people, be killed by humans? And then why would he need that for me it says that God was incapable of understanding and saving humans without becoming a human that could be killed by the very humans that he had created, had been sustaining, had been saving, had been forgiven since the beginning of time. Yet we allow ourselves to get locked into thinking that God is not God without the books that we read. God is good. And while we're fighting over whether Jesus of Nazareth was God, over the appropriate name to use when referring to God, over, the appropriate days of worship, evil is busy. Evil is doing its thing. Evil is changing the earth. And we're standing by fighting one another. Evil is raping our daughters. Yes, yes. Evil is killing our babies. Yes, yes. Evil is breaking into our homes. Evil is stealing our identities. Yes, you may be a very victim. You may be a victim of what I'm talking about. I mean, evil is replacing God with secularism. Yet, we engage in these battles for religious supremacy. Yet we spend years and decades becoming religious scholars, when the truth of the matter is you don't have to be a religious scholar to recognize that Satan is the enemy of God. You don't need to be a scholar to realize that evil is the adversary of good. No. You don't have to be a scholar to recognize that if good is busy fighting good in defense of religion, that they won't have time nor the energy to fight the real enemy of God, which is Satan. No, see, you don't have to be a scholar to recognize that at the end of the day it's either good or evil. Yet we engage in, these religious battles, justifying them as the will of God, not realizing that the will of God is not about good fighting good, but about good coming together to overcome and to defeat evil. That's the will of God. It has always been the will of God, which is why even the first story, the story of Adam is about the evil serpent coming against that which was good. You look at the story of Cain and Abel. It's about good versus evil. Yeah, and again, you must understand that first things establishes a foundation for the things that follow. And if those things were the first things, then they were to establish a foundation that in the beginning it was about good and evil. In the end, it's about good and evil. And beloved, I'm not trying to trick you with some new gospel or fancy words or a philosophical exercise in trickery. No. I just want to help you to open your eyes that you might really see the truth, because it's the truth that will set you free. Not my truth, God's truth. It's just simple things. Simple things. Simple things that if you would open up your eyes, you could see. You could see that God has always been God. You can see that good has always been good. You'll also be able to see that the enemy of God has always been the enemy of God. He hasn't changed, nor is he going to change. We might refer to him as by different names, Satan or Lucifer or whatever you choose to call him. But and what you will also notice is that the adversary of good hadn't changed in all the years and millenniums and time in the earth. Evil has continued to be the adversary of good. Irrespective or despite your religious beliefs, irrespective of your religious doctrines or your religious theologies, evil has and will continue to be the adversary of good. That's not changing. So it behooves us to change and recognize that our real enemy is Satan and his army of evil. And then get about the business of overcoming and defeating him and his enemy. Beloved, I just want you to open up your eyes so that you can see. So that you can see. And then as you begin to see, I want you to join me. That we together might change the world for God and for good. This is God's will. It's always been his will. It was his will when Jesus walked the earth. It was his will when David walked the earth. It was his will when Samuel walked the earth. It was his will when Abraham walked the earth. It was his will when Adam walked the earth. It was his will when the first modern humans that lived and resided in East Africa some 200,000 years ago. It was his will that good would defeat evil in the end. Even John the Revelator talked about the great war, the ultimate war that shall end the earth, will be a war between good and evil. Didn't say between Christian and Muslim, between Jew and Palestinian, between black and white, between good and evil. So when do we get the memo and decide that we're going to stand for God by standing for good, setting aside all of the craziness that we allow ourselves to engage in, fighting over religion, religious theologies, religious doctrines, the names of God, whether Jesus was God in the flesh, all of those things. And I'm not diminishing the value of getting knowledge and getting understanding, but all of it is fruitful. If you're not going to use those things to allow you to unite with others to fight against the real enemy of God, which is Satan, and the real adversary of good, which is evil. I love you. I thank you. I hope that the words that God has inspired me to share with you really resonate with you. And again, don't forget, donate. Go to the, what is it called, the GoFundMe, my GoFundMe page, so that you can begin to donate. That resources might be in the storehouse, that we might begin to expand what God is doing in the earth. I love you. I thank you for tuning in and allowing me into your homes. And until next time, goodbye.